all for joining me tonight, and thanks to Kathy for technical assistance. I'm not a public speaker, so I have text that I'm reading, but I'm going to ad-lib as we go along when the slideshow proceeds. As a young street photographer working in the documentary field, I learned early in my career that the camera can be a tool for self-expression and that photographs can reflect the life and emotional experiences of the artist. In 1969, I made my first significant photograph. Peace March, Ventura, California is important for several reasons. First of all, it represents the political climate of the time. Secondly, it reflects both on my experience as a draftee during the Vietnam War, 1966 to 68, and my subsequent support of anti-war efforts following discharge. Lastly, it serves metaphorically for the strong division I witnessed in my parents' emotional lives as I was growing up. That division is a key element in my interest in unification as expressed in Jungian psychology, dialectics, and Taoism. This photograph is what I just mentioned, Peace March, Ventura, California, 1969.
Ventura? We're in California. Ventura.
Ventura.
Yeah.
Okay. I was a student at Moore Park College, and we went to a march. And at that time, John Lennon's song was a hit on the radio, and that song was titled, Give Peace a Chance. As we were walking along during the Peace March, I photographed the marchers with the sign, and then all of a sudden there was this Marine Corps recruiting sign with an arrow pointing in the opposite direction.
Was there?
Subsequently, this image has served as a template for making photographs displaying diverse elements, overt in this case, subtle in other instances. Since then, the same thread that was established in Peace March weaves through many of my best street photographs. Post-Vietnam War service, I was introduced to philosophy and Jungian psychology at Moore Park College in Southern California. The book Man and His Symbols, edited by Dr. Jung, was recommended and became a touchstone, regularly drawing me back for insight, understanding, and inspiration. My dog-eared copy contains numerous underlined quotes in the chapter Symbolism in the Visual Arts. Of note from that chapter, quote, "It is the aim of the modern artist to give expression to his inner vision of man, to the spiritual background of life and the world," end quote. Go ahead to the next.
Could I ask a question about that photo, or are we gonna wait for questions?
I failed to mention at the beginning that if you have a question, you want to discuss a particular image, just let me know and we can hold it in. So,
Okay.
go ahead.
You know, Michael, my question is, at what point, did you realize you had this when you took it, or did you get home and develop this and then kind of freak out and say, oh my God, look at this? I'm curious.
Well, it's more like I'm caught up in the march. I was a student, a photography student at Moore Park College. And there's an opportunity to photograph an event. And I was photographing other peace-related events around campus. And I went to this, and suddenly there was that sign, but I didn't consciously notice the sign because I was in the midst of moving. And this is a subject that I'll touch on in a while, and that is how the subconscious sees things that we don't necessarily notice. Jung said that subconscious sees everything. Yeah. And so I believe that I noticed it, and that I was able to frame that sign, give peace a chance, between those poles. But it may have been pure luck. But as This said an example of, for me, to be looking for contrast and to be looking for elements that were maybe overt in this case, and sometimes maybe subtle. And you're gonna see as we proceed through the 17 photographs, this is a recurring theme in my work. Post-Vietnam War service, I was introduced to philosophy and Jungian psychology. I mentioned that. Yeah, go to the next photograph, yeah. So in the early 70s, I moved to Boston, and I started photographing in the North End, which is the Italian neighborhood. And it was really interesting there because it was like being in Italy. They had the stores, you know, the meat market, the bread store. I'd been to Italy when I was a teenager with my family. So it was very interesting, and there was a school there, and when school was out, I could pretty much just stand around and photograph, and nobody seemed to notice. And that's really great, you know. I've had instances in my career where I was verbally abused and chased. A guy chased me with a knife once. He thought I was photographing him. I wasn't, but he saw the camera and he just assumed. Anyway, I got away, obviously.
It's hard to be invisible when you have a camera.
What's that?
You're not invisible with a camera.
No, that's true. Yeah, but you can become invisible, and this is a technique that I learned from Cartier-Bresson, the great French photographer. I'll talk about him in a while. And that is to blend into the scenery, the background. And sometimes that means standing around for an hour. I like to find a location, a backdrop that I think is really important, and then wait for things to come in, pass through it. And in some cases, I have photographed people in place. They're sitting around. First they notice me, and then they forget about me. And that's when the magic can happen. It's candid photography, and I'm going to talk about street photography at this moment because that's what it is, and that is, it's real life. Nothing is posed in street photography. You're looking for elements that are of interest, of human interest. I'm old school humanist photography. This scene right here captures children, the girls playing their part as future mothers, the boys standing around watching.
Yeah, Tara just said that the male is so much taller, which is kind of interesting. He's in his own way lording over the scene.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, boys were socialized different. So boys are not going to feed a baby, a doll, a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Boys didn't do that when I grew up. They didn't feed the babies.
No, but the girls have got it down. They know exactly when they've got it all figured out. You know how to feed the baby and how to push the stroller. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a proud future mother smiling. She's smiling at them, not at me. So that was the North End. I did a lot of photographing in that part of town. For decades, I carried around a small notebook, like I have here today. In 1973, while doing street photography in Boston, I wrote down this observation, quote, "These recent photographs that contain opposite relationships within the same frame are expressions of my purely individual center. A sense of balance has been reached," end quote. Although I didn't understand then why I sought to create balance by uniting diverse relationships in photographic form, I did begin to realize the link to my family experiences growing up. I also saw that a pattern of self-expression was developing and that each photograph reflected my emotional response in the moment to the play of light and dark dramas unfolding before me. Next photo. while I was in Boston, I learned about the Red Sox. It's the professional baseball team there. And I thought I'd like to go to a game and photograph. But it was the first game of the season. They were playing their rival, the New York Yankees. So it had been sold out for months. But I went anyway, and luckily a fellow raised his hand and said, I have an extra ticket, and I just grabbed his own. It was right on first base.
Yeah.
And so instead of photographing the game, I would turn and photograph the audience. In those days, there were no jerseys, no hats, nothing to identify which team you were rooting for. But if you look at the faces here, by the way, the score was Red Sox 14, Yankees 3 at this moment. There's two guys in this photograph who are just not exactly happy with the outcome.
Who won the game? Who won?
Well, the Red Sox. Yeah, they definitely won. They didn't go on to win the World Series that year, but they were a good team. Later I discovered German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hankel's doctrine of opposites. For him, quote, dialectical tensions are inherent in all conceptual philosophical conflicts. Resolution is achieved through a synthesis of these opposites, end quote. I find this doctrine of dialectics places a framework around the narratives that my photographs reveal. My images mirror Hegel's philosophical thinking about opposing forces and my search for resolution and unification. Before I went to Boston, I started photographing on Skid Row in Los Angeles. There's some family history related to Skid Row, and that my mother's father was an alcoholic, and he would end up on Skid Row. And it was family history that was tragic. And I went there to try to understand what was behind that impulse of his. So I started photographing, and then when I came back from Boston, I checked in with my friend Charles Pavlich. I had met him in Big Sur. I hitchhiked to Big Sur in 1968 to the Big Sur Folk Festival, and he was managing a campground there, and we became friends. I camped at that site, and we became friends, and I ended up working at the campground the next 2 summers. Charles was a former jazz drummer and an aspiring photographer himself and a filmmaker. While I was in Boston, he was going to Skid Row to make a film about Skid Row because his father was an alcoholic who also used to go to Skid Row and spend time in the bars. So when I got back, he said, well, I've shot a lot of film, I want you to help me edit this film. So we would spend many hours editing film, and it was in Santa Monica where I was living at the time, and so was he, and we used to go down to the beach. On this particular day, that's him on the left, we were walking along, and I spotted a man coming towards us in a suit, walking the beach. His head was down, his hands were behind his back. He was contemplating something deep and emotional, and so I framed the two of them on the beach, and fortunately there were no other people on the beach at that time. That's the pier in the background. But it's another example of dialectics in my photographic efforts. The synthesis that Hegel spoke about parallels Dr. Jung's thoughts about dialectics. He wrote that, quote, the whole course of individuation, The balancing of conscious and unconscious states is dialectical, end quote. Jung strove to reconcile the paradox between the collective and individual truth. To do so, he proposed the use of the dialectical method in the therapeutic setting. In his eyes, this is the only method that can respect individuality, as the dialectic does not work with preconceived notions and fixed rules. The dialectic is a method that strives to unite opposing tendencies in the psyche and produce a new synthesis, which Jung called the symbol formation process. In Man and His Symbols, chapter authors explore the vast unconscious realm that lies beyond conscious awareness. The book examines how symbols and archetypes manifest from the collective unconscious, emerging in dreams, culture expression, and art. The inner unity of opposites is also explored in Alan Watts' book, The Two Hands of God, The Myths of Polarity. Next photo.
Can I make one comment about that
Yeah.
photo?
No.
I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, but I love those shadows. I mean,
That's it.
yeah, the men and the figures, okay, that's one thing. But man, those shadows, where you've got the younger man, his shadow is straight out. You've got this older guy who's his shadow is hunched over. I mean, look, could there be a more accurate picture that depicts the generational shifts that happen? It's really quite beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Charles is looking out towards the ocean, and the other man is looking down. And
The beach, the sea.
so, yeah, it's one of my favorites.
What was the text you're referring to of Alan Watts?
I'm sorry, what?
What was the text you were referring to, Alan Watts?
The Alan Watts book is called The Two Hands of God, The Myths of Polarity, and this is a terrific book. My mother was a big fan of Alan Watts, and when I was living in Santa Monica, and my parents were living out in Thousand Oaks, and she called me one day and she said, Alan Watts is going to be speaking at a church in Santa Monica, and let's go. So she came and got me, and we went. We were standing in line, and right behind us was the Smothers Brothers.
Oh dear.
They were hip to Watts too. Anyway, I don't remember too much about his talk, but other than it was very impressive, and I've been, I've known about him, and I've read his works in the past, and recently I wanted to make sure I spelled something related to him correctly, so I got out that book and I started reading it, and it's really an amazing book. Okay, next. In 1976, I went to the Rose Parade in Pasadena with the intent of photographing the crowd, not necessarily the parade. It's the people that are always of interest to me at events like this, because they're busy looking and enjoying what they're seeing, so their guard is down. They hardly even notice you. And in this case, the man on the left was standing on a chair. The other man was pacing back and forth. The sun is blazing in on part of the wall. And I was thinking, well, I really want that man on the right side. I want him to walk into that picture just so those two are connected. So this is kind of a visual study of class structure. The man on the left is middle class. The man on the right is working class. But that's just what they're wearing. We don't really know. And do we even want to make assumptions about their place in society. But by comparing them, in this case, it raises questions, and that's what I like to do with my photographs, is not answer a question, but to raise questions. And for the viewer to look at a photograph and take their own experience to it. And perhaps there's many interpretations for this particular photograph.
Just looking at it visually, I think it's really stunning the way there's this diagonal going through. And it's actually continued by the guy's jacket in the front.
Oh, yeah.
And it follows through. It's, beautiful composition.
Yeah, thank you.
I see symbols in the hats. They have different hats
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
time that were popular.
Yeah, sure.
It's like,
Yeah,
it's like a-
the jackets. The dynamic interplay of opposing tendencies, whether manifesting concretely or symbolically over time in any one of the various art forms, such as painting, photography, etc., can be a factor leading artists, as Dr. Jung proposed and proved in his own life, to resolution and individuation. I mentioned earlier that I lived in Santa Monica, and I was down at the beach a lot, just hanging out, beach bum kind of a lifestyle at that time. And one day I was in Venice, and I spotted this guy, and he was about to jump in the waves and paddle out. But what caught my attention was that he had a wetsuit on, but only one leg is covered. And I thought, half price sale? Hard to know. And I didn't ask him. But what I like about him is, and his pose, is that there's the vast ocean, and he's contemplating, his position in that and how he can ride a wave and that sort of thing. And then up in the upper left area, there's a surfer that's just starting to come into the image.
Yeah. That's dialectic for sure, right? Those two are engaged in a visually some kind of
Visually,
conversation.
they probably knew each other, but I don't know. But there is that dynamic of.
So that's a guy coming in on the crest of a wave.
Yeah. Yeah, he's just starting, so all you see is part of his body. You don't even see the surfboard yet. I titled this Surfer Dude. Venice, California. In the book The Tao of Jung, author David Rosen draws parallels between Jung's thoughts about individuation and Taoism. Jung said that, quote, the Chinese Taoists never failed to recognize the polarities and the paradoxes in what is alive. In addition, what is meant by the self is not only in me, but in all beings, like the Tao. It is psychic totality, end quote. C.A. Maynor, a Jungian analyst and colleague of Jung's, believed that, quote, his psychology of opposites is virtually the same as Taoism. He was tied to nature and its contradictions, yet he was devoutly spiritual and clearly more Taoist than anything else, end quote. Next one. When I was working on Skid Row, I got to know a lot of the residents of the Chapman Hotel. This is Mona. She was a housekeeper there, and she and her girlfriend shared this room. They were a gay couple, and I would hang out with them. There was a lot of prejudice at the time against gay people, much more than there is now. There were people who lived in a hotel that weren't nice to them. So it was good to get to hang out with them and get to know them. But one day I arrived and her partner was there, but Mona hadn't quite gotten up yet. And I asked if it was okay to take a picture, and she said sure. I like the signed bed, and I like the Virgo thing, and I like the animals up in the left corner. The look, her look.
Was that Chaplin for Charlie Chaplin? The Chaplin Hotel, you said?
No, Chapman,
Oh,
not Charlie
Chapman.
Chaplin, not Chapman, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was on the corner of 5th and Wall Street, and that's the title of the book that Charles Pavlich, the fellow in the beach scene earlier, it was published 5th and Wall Street, Skid Row, Los Angeles in the 1970s. Earlier I spoke about recognizing that my image making was an expression of my purely individual center, and that a framework and pattern of self-expression was developing. That development was influenced by mentors, by a kinship with other photographers who've expressed similar sentiments or have been recognized for important works in the documentary and street photography fields. One of those photographers is Walker Evans. In the book Walker Evans, a biography, Belinda Rathbone writes that, quote, Evans embraced his own inner contradictions and those of his world and made them articulate in visual terms, end quote. Biographer James Morrow notes that, quote, in any full-fledged Evans photograph, stories run in several directions. His was an art of juxtaposition. Narrative caught in the fixed moment was one of Evans' principal talents, end quote. Next one. In May of 1979, I flew to the Republic of Ireland to attend the traditional Irish music festival. And while I was there, I met some interesting musicians, one of which was Deirdre Creed. And she was in Ireland's only all-women's punk rock band. And over Guinness, I learned about punk rock music. And I knew that there was things brewing in Hollywood, but I hadn't checked that out. And what I learned from her was that punk rock music, in its early form, was very political. It commented on romance, of course, but it also dealt with the difficulties of life. It was documentary in lyrical form, and that inspired me to check it out when I got back to Los Angeles. And the first band that I got to know was the Plugs. That's this trio here, and they were opening for an important figure in the music scene. So I went to photograph them during the time of the sound check prior to the concert, and I found this corner in the green room of the Olympic Auditorium, and I positioned them there. So this photograph became important in the music scene in Los Angeles because a silkscreen artist named Richard Duardo liked to make silkscreen posters of bands, and he asked if he could make one with this photograph, and I said sure. And then John and Exene from the other band in, one of the other bands in Hollywood, the most prominent band, called X, saw that silkscreen poster and asked me to photograph them. Go ahead. So, my first portrait session with them was at the Whiskey A Go Go, and then I started photographing them when they were playing around town, and this photograph was made after they sold out the Greek Theater, which was 5,000 seats in Los Angeles, and I wanted to make sure that that metal X was in the picture. That metal X came off of the demolition of the X-Lax building. One day John, who's on the right there, was driving somewhere in Los Angeles. There was the crew demolishing, and he stopped and he asked the foreman, he said, "Hey, can I have that X?" And he's, "Yeah, what do you want with that X?" "Well, I just like it, can I have it?" And the foreman yelled to the guy with the crane, "The kid wants the X, don't drop it." Of course he dropped it. He didn't damage it, but it's an important element in this particular photograph, and it's been used many times. I just had a book published by Percival Press documenting my 44 years of working with this band, and this is the cover photograph.
Does that have anything to do with Gen X?
What's that?
Generation, no, Gen X.
Gen X? No,
No.
that's a different generation. I think some people in Gen X probably like this band. Yeah.
So, one of the things that's occurring to me with the bands is that this isn't completely street photography, and yet you're still capturing surprises and things that are unknown. Is that right? Like, for example, you'll maybe make a suggestion or ask for something, but then something spontaneous happens.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't pose them. I didn't say, "I want you to do this or that." And like I said earlier, I like to find a location and a backdrop. And that's what I did here. And I chose this image out of a couple of dozen that I shot in this location because Exene, the woman in the photo there, looked off in this other direction. Exene is an artist, songwriter, singer, and she's a very moody person. And she often gets just kind of off into her a mental state that you don't know where she's at. But in any case, that's really good for a photographer to capture, because this band never acted like they were posing for a photograph. I would put them in various locations and just kind of hang around, see what happened. Raise the camera, take a shot. Maybe I'd say, so and so move over a little bit or whatever. In any case, that's the story of X.
What kind of camera do you use? What kind of camera do you use?
It's a Pentax. I mentioned earlier that I was in the service, I was in the Navy, and at the end of the Vietnam cruise, we were in Yokosuka Harbor in Japan. I went to the PX there and I wanted to buy a camera. I actually wanted to, I got drafted, I wanted to go to photography school, and they said it's full, there's no room, so they made me do other things in the Navy. But at the end of that cruise, I went to the PX and I found a Pentax camera, and there was Nikon, there was a couple other brands, but the Pentax just really felt right. And so I've used Pentax ever since. Even a digital Pentax.
Should I go to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead. I went on 3 tours with X. Their very first tour in 1980, and 2 others. This photograph was shot in a hotel room right before the band was to go to the venue to perform. And Exene was playing cards. You can see a deck of cards in her hand, sitting on this couch. And I spotted the Renoir reproduction on the wall. And it was very well done, you know, the frame is beautiful and all. And that painting is called Two Sisters. So I positioned, I asked her to sit up on the back of that. This is a case where I, you know, was more of a pose than a lot of images, but I asked her to sit there, and so I could draw a contrast between, you know, Renoir's rendition of beauty and a punk rock songstress version. Another mentor influenced in my work that I mentioned earlier is Henri Cartier-Bresson. From the book Bystander, A History of Street Photography, Colin Westerbeck writes, quote, "In Cartier-Bresson's most powerful photographs, we sense clearly the binary nature of his vision that looks in as well as out. Being pulled in 2 different directions as an artist has created the tension that exists in his work between background and foreground, the elegantly composed scene and the vanishing figure in it, the eternality of forms and the immediacy of action," end quote. In his own words, Cartier-Bresson stated that, quote, "Photography is the simultaneous recognition in a fraction of a second of the significance of an event as well as of a precise organization of forms," end quote. Cartier-Bresson also spoke about the lack of dialectical tensions in the images of most of his contemporaries. Okay. In addition to his great contributions to humanist photography, Cartier-Bresson also is known for his concept, the decisive moment. He believed that, quote, "Through the act of living, the discovery of oneself is made concurrently with the discovery of the world around us. A balance must be established between these 2 worlds, the one inside us and the one outside us. As the result of a constant reciprocal process, both these worlds come to form a single one," end quote. I went to Cuba with my mother and my father in 1947. My dad worked for Procter & Gamble, and he had an assignment to fix some mechanical problem at a soap factory that was there. So we spent 5 months. Of course, I don't remember anything about it, but my mother told me many stories about that, and I have all of the letters that she wrote to her mother about that experience. In any case, in 2012, I was able to attend a licensed delegation called Witness for Peace on a trip to Havana, Cuba. It was about a 10-day trip. And the license through the federal government restricted us to stay in Havana. But I met friends on that trip, and we said we want to go back they knew a guide, and so we snuck in a couple of times. So I've subsequently been to Cuba about 5 times, and it's a great place to photograph. This particular image I titled "Down the Road, Trinidad, Cuba, 2013.
Color,
Heard somebody say something.
color.
Colorful, yeah.
Everything's been black and white so far.
Yeah. Well, I got a digital camera, and I'm exploring color. But you're going to see in the next photograph what was a color image I converted to black and white for a special purpose.
But what is the fundamental opposites in this particular photo, in your view?
Inside, outside.
Well, in my mind, it's the 2 women conversing on one hand, and then there's the little boy. He's engaged down the street. Down the street is my title of it. So it's not a intense contrast. It's more subtle. There's that church steeple in the background. So there's some mystery there about, him in relation to the 2 women. What are they talking about? And several people have said, why are her fingers like this? What does that mean? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the contrasts are, white and black, first of all, and then home, domestic, and then the sacred with the church, and then toward us and then away from us as audience members.
Yeah.
And somehow the photograph loses color on the side
Yeah.
with where the boy is looking down that road. That's an odd contrast too.
It almost looks like a painting because of those colors.
Absolutely.
The colors are.
Yeah.
And it's so distinctively Cuba. I mean, when you put it up there, I went, oh, Cuba.
Yeah, those were the actual colors. I didn't do anything to manipulate the color of her dress, the color of that door. I went back there a few years later, and the green had faded quite a bit. So it was fairly freshly painted. Okay. So this image was shot with a digital camera in color, and I was in England as part of some travels I was doing that included Norway and Ireland, and this is a total tourist trap now, unless you go on the special days of the solstice, etc. They don't let you get anywhere near it. It's all, there's a walkway that's made out of wood, and so I stood back, and I noticed these birds, and this is a jackdaw, and there were flocks of them that would circle in and out, and they'd all land on Stonehenge, and then they'd all fly away. And I was waiting for something a little different, and then suddenly they all flew away, but there was one left, and that bird is nicely silhouetted against the grass, and that stone to the left is what they call the slaughter stone, and its purpose is unknown, although they think that it was a ritual stone for periods where perhaps they would slaughter a goat for a ceremony or whatever. In any case, I like that contrast of the bird to this ancient stone, and I title it Jackdaw Guardian of Stonehenge. Although Evans and Cartier-Bresson never did suggest that Jungian psychology or Taoism influence their thinking, the results of their efforts suggest a correlation and thus a potential link to Carl Jung's concept of individuation and the collective unconscious. Okay. I was in London and just walking around and I spotted this this poster, this illuminated poster by a bus stop that was promoting, happy vacation in Spain, I believe. And so as I walked towards it, I spotted this Muslim woman, and she was plugged into her phone. She was very seriously listening to something, perhaps from the Koran. And I just raised my camera and I question whether anybody would be offended by this relationship, so I don't show it very often. But so far nobody, it has been in several exhibitions, nobody's complained. Does anybody here see any reason why she is seen in a bad light by comparison?
No, I'd say it's the other way around. It's that poster seems really kind of superficial.
Exactly. Yeah, well, okay, you're making a very good point there, and that is,
My impression of people not liking their photo taken is that they think their soul will be taken.
yeah, that's Native Americans believe that taking their picture would steal their soul.
Right, I've heard that in third world countries, yeah.
So I don't know, I haven't had the chance to show it to anybody who happens to be Muslim, but her seriousness, I think, is a very good point there compared to the superficiality of, fly off to Spain for the holiday. Okay. I have friends in Guanajuato, Mexico, and I've been there many times. The first time was with my family. We lived in Texas and we did road trips into Mexico. And Guanajuato is famous for the mummies. Have you heard about the mummies in Guanajuato? The elevation is around 5,000 feet. It's very dry climate. The humidity is about 5%, and there's minerals in the soil. So in this particular graveyard, where the Mummy Museum is now situated, when people were buried, they often mummified. The family was renting the space in this churchyard, and if they didn't keep up the rent, they would dig up the bodies, but the church wouldn't allow them to be cremated. So they created a catacomb underneath the cemetery, and sometimes there were parts of, I went there with my family, and we actually went down into the catacombs. And in one room there was a pile of leg bones and, arm bones, and, these bodies often fell apart. But in one room, kind of a long, narrow room, probably about as wide as from here to there was a bench that ran in a U shape, and mummies were standing up all around, just as they had been retrieved from the grave. And many of them were still in, there was a soldier, and there was a woman who had died in childbirth, and she's holding her infant. Pretty dramatic for a 16-year-old to see that, and it made quite an impression on me. But since then, I have friends who live there, and I can always go and stay, and so it's a great place to photograph. And this particular day was what they call the annual Olla Festival. And this is a lake here that supplies the water for Guanajuato. And on the opposite shore there's tents and things set up, and then, you know, people are selling various kinds of food. One of the delicacies is grasshopper. Not my exact taste of sort of thing I like to eat, but in any case, there's lots of it. And so I'm walking along this side, and I see there's some dynamics going on with these people who are all the three people on the right were related, and then there's the dog, and then there's this couple. So I just kind of hung around for maybe half an hour, and after a while they didn't even notice me. I like what the man's shirt says, you only have one life to live, or something like that. And he's carrying on a bit of a contentious discussion with the woman on the right. The woman in the center is, you know, on her phone, and the dog is looking off towards the lake, and then you've got the lovers on the left. So this is the sort of thing that I am aiming to try to make photographs of, is more storylines. And I think this one has several. Okay. My friend who lives in Guanajuato does cultural tours in Mexico City. And I went on one, 2019. So we go to all the various places, Casa Azul, museums, and it's a great trip. In fact, I met a fellow, Michael Brewer, who has been involved with this organization in the past. And during that trip, he told me about the Southern Arizona Friends of Jung. I didn't know it existed. So I made a mental note. And then he and I got together several times just to hang out and talk. And I said, I've got to find out more about this organization. And so, you know, I went to the website and got involved about a year and a half ago, something like that. In any case, I had a couple hours to kill before was going to take a cab to the airport to fly out to Mexico City, and so I went over and there's always some kind of protest going on along the Paseo de la Reforma, which is the main boulevard of Mexico City. It's modeled after the Champs-Elysees in Paris. So it's very wide, and there's a park that runs down the center. But over on this left side, there was a march for minors' rights. And that statue in the background is the Angel of Independence. Very dynamic, gold-leafed angel in the sky. All related to the independence from Spain. So I'm always looking for ways to incorporate that into a photograph, and I came across these two women who were part of this minors' rights march. And I was immediately drawn to the contrast between the two. The more indigenous woman on the left, dressed in indigenous style of blouse, and then the upscale woman on the right with the gold glasses, the glamorous look, the expensive purse probably. They were united in solidarity for this particular event, and sticking out of, or on the flag, the white flag there, that's Emiliano, I get his name right, Emiliano Zapata, who was a very leading figure, famous in the Mexican Revolution, fighting against the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, 1910 to 1920. Zapata is revered You probably may have heard of the Zapatistas, which was a group of indigenous people in southern Mexico that were fighting for indigenous rights. In any case, that's Mexico City in 2019. Next one, please. Five years later, I was back in Mexico City. This is last year, 2014. And it was the time of the presidential and regional, city, etc. elections. And I'm walking through that park that's in the middle of the Paseo, and I spot this election banner. And I seen a lot of those hanging from, along the highways, promoting this candidate who was running for the mayor of Mexico City, Clara. And as I looked at it, I thought, I think there's somebody under that, that banner. But I wasn't quite sure
Socks.
until that blue and green sock stuck out. And I realized, that's somebody who has yanked down this poster and is using it to cover themselves while they're sleeping on this bench. So I really looked carefully at this scene here, and I wanted to position this stone figure silhouetted against the background, and I just stood there and waited for things to come into the image again, and along came this couple who were obviously very much in a relationship, and he didn't look at me, just kind of looking off, but they're engaged, they're kind of welded together in contrast to this man under a election banner.
You put a tripod up and you just waited.
No, I don't use a tripod.
Oh.
No, it was, I just adjust my camera, and if they had been 2 feet closer to me when they walked through, they would be out of focus. And so that's what I was looking for. I actually used my focal range on my camera to focus in between. You see where the pavement is there? It goes from a light color to dark. So I focused on that spot so that the depth of field would capture anybody coming through that location. So that I was, standing around for quite a while, maybe half hour, 45 minutes, waiting for something to come into the image to draw a comparison to. Okay.
It's really powerful.
As we approach the conclusion of my presentation, I share with you this quote from Claire Dunn, author of Kor Jung, Wounded Healer of the Soul. I just happened to spot the book right here in the library. This is a terrific book. I have a softbound version, which is bigger format, and it's a wonderful book. She said, Jung lived in two worlds, earth-rooted and spiritually centered. Both lives, outer and inner, he saw as the natural state of realized humanity. Throughout his long life, he learned to live and reconcile these opposites into a unity of wholeness, end quote. Okay, you already brought it up to that one. Okay, good. I began the presentation with Peace March. If you can go to the next one, please.
To the next one? Okay.
Yeah, we're actually going
Talk
back
about
to,
this one.
going back to,
Go back to this one
we're
later.
going back to the first one
Okay.
as I'm concluding my presentation here.
Okay.
Okay. I began my presentation with Peace March Ventura. Dr. Jung's concept of archetypes comes to mind when viewing both photographs. Now you can go to the next one.
You mean the
Forward,
The last one.
forward. I set it up so you go forward.
okay, you mean the one that I just showed?
Yes. But I set it up, there you go. I'll repeat this one line. Dr. Jung's concept of archetypes comes to mind when viewing both photographs. He said, quote, "The unconscious, the soul, does not speak in words, it speaks in symbols," end quote. In the first photograph, we see two dialectically opposed archetypes, the warrior and the peacemaker. In this photograph, I see the trickster with the tree as headdress on the right, the shadow figure on the left, the caregiver, man with the animals, in the center, and the wise man above. There is also the palm tree, a subtle Taoist symbol of yin and yang. That may be too deep.
Is
I
this
see
Himmel
these
Park?
things.
Michael, is this Himmel Park?
Yes,
Is it
this
Himmel Park?
Himmel Park?
No, this
No.
this is Himmel Park.
I thought that's what I said.
This
Okay.
is the Sunday dance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which
And this was shot with my phone. And it was one of those things where I had noticed the man in the background, and he's there every Sunday
Mm-hmm.
in that position, or maybe, left or right a ways.
Mm-hmm.
And he's always just observing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I went to talk with him last Sunday. He's
And every Sunday.
he's quite the wise man. We
Wow.
had a lengthy discussion. He's a Latino man. He's lived in Tucson for many years. He's traveled all over the world. Very interesting guy. His name is Fernando. Anyway, on this particular day, I hadn't met him, but I had spotted him, and I was intrigued by him, the way he was, the Buddha-like.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the back of my mind, I thought about, and photographing during the dance is discouraged. But in this particular case, suddenly along comes this man with the dogs, and in from two angles come these other two figures, and I just raised my phone and one photograph.
Wow.
The Sunday morning event, which, by the way, Dan Sweet introduced me to. I didn't know about it until he told me. He and I and Mike are, along with Charles, are part of a Jungian men's group that meets once a month at the library. So I've learned a lot from my association with these three fellows. Anyway, the name of the title of this photograph is Primal Dance, Tucson 2025. During my 56 years of studying dialectics, Taoism, and Jungian psychology, I have sought to reconcile opposites into a unity of psychic wholeness and resolution through the artistic discipline of photography. The photographs I've shared with you are reflections of that effort. They, among over 100 other photographs, will be included in a forthcoming book titled Windows, Mirrors, Echoes. Also, a large frame print of Primal Dance, this photograph, about that size actually, will be included in the exhibition Big Works at the Steinfeld Gallery and Studios during the first Saturday Art Walk reception, December 6th. And that show will run until the 20th of December. I brought some flyers if any of you are interested in going to that. You can have one of those. I hope to see you all there, and thank you again, and thanks to Kathy for joining me this evening.
questions or should we just get up and get social?
Are there any questions?
Questions.
Questions?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that I would prefer some questions, but I'm not saying I have
a
one.
question. Does anyone have a question?
What's your biggest question?
I have a technical question. This photo and some of the other ones that you showed are extremely focused for detail, so you can almost see blades of grass in this photo. You can see
Right.
hair in your Guanajuato photo. Were you doing something special with the photos to get that?
Well,
That's really quite
when I
detailed
was,
focus.
yeah, when I was shooting black and white with film, I was paying a lot of attention to focus, and so trying to make sharp photographs is something you learn when you're a student of photography, and in other times, you know, things happen so fast that you don't really I believe that a lot of where this is a perfect example. I believe that I'm tuned into my unconscious when I make a photograph like this,
Yeah.
because I can't really be thinking. I can't stand there and think this is what I want to create. I think my unconscious is directing me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love about photography, because it's an instantaneous process, like Cartier-Bresson, as I quoted earlier. He spoke of that, and he was very good at that. The decisive moment. This photograph, I believe, is a decisive moment. Everything in it has value, tells a story of its own, and then there's the combination of the elements in the background and the palm tree, and that the silhouette of the trickster against that tree, like it's coming out of his head.
Please don't say.
I know I couldn't have consciously been able to do that without some vision deep inside directing my finger on the camera or on the phone. Anyway, I think, does that answer your question?
Sure. I'm
No.
if you look at the detail in this photo versus your first photo, this has so much more fine grain focus than your first one. Not in composition. I mean, I'm not talking about composition. I'm talking about the technical capture of the detail.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just the difference in the cameras that you were using in these two different decades. I know you probably do it without thinking, but really you're getting blades of grass here.
Well, this is a park.
Well, I know, but go back to that first photo so that people can see. You can't see pebbles on the street.
Remember,
in
this
the
is a
first
digital
photo.
image, and the first photo is a film image, and film has a lot of grain to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't see pebbles on the street, right?
Because it's film.
Yeah, I see
That
your
is-
point.
Yeah,
Here.
yeah.
The precision of the letters, all of that. So in this last photo, it's really, really detailed. You're seeing leaves on the trees,
So,
blades of grass,
yeah, so.
wrinkles on the fingers, even though they're pretty far away from you.
Well, it's entirely different subject matter, and do you find one better because of the technical aspect than the other?
No, I just am seeing a real difference
I see.
there.
Yeah.
No, they're both very wonderful.
Thank you.
So, Michael,
Oh, here we have a question.
I was impressed by your description of the process, and it really made, I've been, I set aside the Tao of Young and have been involved with Margaret Klink since her presentation to us. But it seemed to me like what you're describing with photography is the very process of individuation that she described in her presentation, that an image, when we confront some inner outer situation and an image arises, and I'm looking at your photos as images that have arisen, and then as we engage with that image through the process of coming into dialogue with it, personifying it, interrogating it, then we move into the area of art, in the sense that a symbol arises from the image and our interrogation and processing of it, and as we amplify and embody that symbol, that's the process of becoming, of reconciling some kind of opposites, of coming together in making a step in individuation. Did I get that right, Leon?
Sounds right to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's very similar to what I was gonna comment, because when you said Cartier-Bresson said that it's about what's that magical moment, it's the
Decisive moment.
decisive moment, right? And so the Jungians talk about holding the opposites. Marion, gosh, she's a Jungian because she used that exact term. It's basically holding the opposites to the point of combustion. And that's when you get your, like, you either call it like a solution, an image, and a intuition, an inspiration. But like there you are waiting, like you're waiting with your camera. In this case, you weren't waiting, you just knew. But it's still, the opposites are there, and there's some kind of almost like alchemical, like, taking fire. And that's what you're capturing. That's where I see the connection to the Jungian idea of opposites. Does that make sense to you, Dan?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that's alchemy then.
Yeah.
I think it
You
is.
said alchemical and
Yeah. I mean, it's, but alchemical doesn't necessarily have to be like matter. It could be psychic elements.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Sure.
So that could be brewing. I mean, clearly the images that you pick up are somehow reflecting something that is going on in your psyche. Even if it's out there in the world, for some reason, that's what you're picking
No,
up.
I definitely think that's a fact, and I even commented at the very beginning of the presentation that my photographs are representative of my psychic whatever.
Yeah. Your patterns.
yeah, well, and that's the thing that Jung said, that all the images arise from your unconscious.
To Dan's point, and maybe Kathy's, I think the same thing happens with art in the creation of a drawing or a painting, especially if color is involved. I noticed that you might start with, I just did this recently when I traveled, making a landscaping journal, going to the Grand Canyon, where I thought I was drawing something, but man, I start working with colors and then kaboom, maybe this thing on the side jumps out, and it's not what I would have considered, the perspective of what I thought the subject was going to be. And I think that's what happens when we interact with these kinds of images.
Well, and when we hold the space, one way or the other. So like if you're holding the space, which means you're allowing things to happen with your drawing or your painting. But, you know, it could be in any art form. It's definitely there with theater too, you know, holding the space.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely, absolutely.
Yeah, I recently was listening to a BBC or PBS on the radio, right? And this kid became really famous in Berkeley, in California recently, very young, because he's taking pictures of wildlife. And the thing that stood out to me, he goes, "You're looking eye to eye. You're not thinking about it. You are there with this wildlife and taking pictures, and it's eye to eye, the wildlife." And that really hit me hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have it written down if you want to know more about him and what he does. He's got a big studio now, but that wasn't what it was about, like him being famous. What it was about was his connection with, it's not in his head when he's doing this. So that's my question is, you're not in your head when you're doing this. You're totally present and you're you're in a different realm, like the spiritual world or whatever you think of it as.
Yeah, and it's taken, 56 years of doing this work with a camera where should go to the last image, to be able to see the elements of that last photograph coming together.
But I mean, you're not trying to capture something in your head. You're not saying, well, I want to capture this and this and that. So a street photographer is different than other photographers.
Yeah, that's why I like to do candid photography, street photography, because there's an element of surprise. You don't know what you're going to get, and when you get something that speaks volumes, I think, like this photograph does. Now that raises the question. I love Ansel Adams. I love, I have many books about other photographers, and I like a lot of work that's out there. I don't do that kind of nature photography, but in the past I said I don't do pretty pictures. I do psychological studies. That's what I like doing. And because I learn from them, and because it taps into my unconscious to do that, as opposed to setting up a tripod at the Snake River in Idaho and waiting for just the right light to come into it, which, it's a different sort of thing altogether. And those are the photographs that people pay, $35,000 for and put on their mantle. Is anybody going to want to buy this picture here and on the wall? And every time they walk by it, they say, "Oh, there's something in there I didn't see before." If it's this group, perhaps. But the general public, who knows?
So
But
this
it
is
doesn't matter to me. I
spontaneous.
do what I do.
It's
because-
spontaneous.
Yeah. I
You're
do
just
what I-
capturing something. You're not.
what I'm saying is I do it because this is what speaks to me. This is what I learn from. This is what I expand my consciousness doing. And whether it sells any prints or not doesn't matter. But I appreciate this opportunity to talk about it with this group of smart people.